Want the freshest cup of coffee in Gettysburg? Then visit Bantam Roasters, formerly 82 Cafe at 82 Steinway Avenue. They roast all of their coffee in-house, and they have a full coffee bar to keep you caffeinated during your trip. Visit them at www.raggededgerc.com for their menu and shipping options for all of their freshly roasted coffee. Use promo code Hancock for 10% off your order in the cafe.
This episode of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you in part by me, audiobook narrator Mike Scott. Narrator of Savis Beattie's Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864, and Unlike Anything That Ever Floated, the Monitor and Virginia and the Battle of Hampton Roads. If you are an author or publisher interested in having your titles produced as audiobooks, or even just in learning more about the process, give me a shout. You can find my contact info on my website, MikeScottVoice.com. That's MikeScottVoice.com.
Hey, if you're in need of a sign and are in the Chambersburg area, you need not look any further than Bear Sign Service. They offer lighted and non-lighted signs, vehicle lettering and wraps, flags and flagpoles, and can ship anywhere. With over 75 years of being in business, Bear Sign Service is the oldest full-service sign company in Franklin County. So check them out at bearsign.com. That's BAERSIGN.com, and tell them you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg. Are you ready for your next great Civil War read? Then try the new historical novel, The Heavens Falling, by Jonathan Lucci. Follow the members of the Dawson family through the Civil War, from the halls of Congress to the bloody fields of battle, and from the decks of gunboats to the solitude of Lincoln's office. The Heavens Falling is available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or visit theheavensfalling.com to order. That's theheavensfalling.com.
Hi, this is Kelly Gormley, author of Cease Firing, Life and Death at the Swope Manor, and you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios, you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Ask a Gettysburg Guide. And today we are doing the counterpart of an episode we did a while ago with Rick Schroeder, licensed battlefield guide, retired orthopedic surgeon. Mm-hmm. And that was about Union officers' wounds. And of course, it would not be a complete telling of the story of the Battle of Gettysburg if you did not have the Confederate officers' wounds. Now, of course, these are famous wounds. Some of them, or notable, right?
Right.
Famous or notable.
Right.
And welcome, Rick.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's always a pleasure to be here. This is fun, and I love talking about medical stuff to anybody who will listen.
So do I. Just this past Saturday, we were at the park, at the visitor center for the final winter lecture.
Right.
Chris Gwynn did one on Camp Letterman. Very interesting stuff. And you were credited in the beginning, you among other people,
yes,
for being the people that he stole his information from. His words, not mine.
That's perfectly fine. As a guide, my job is to steal as much as I can from rangers, guides, visitors, podcast hosts, whatever.
Right. It doesn't matter. So, but yeah, so there's a lot of interesting stuff here. What always fascinates me, and I've said this before on the shows, but I think it bears repeating because I don't think everybody else really gets it enough, because I haven't heard a lot of emails saying you're absolutely right, Matt. And so until that moment, I'm going to keep repeating this. It is amazing to me the success rate of Civil War medicine.
Yes.
Now you may be thinking to yourself, if you're listening, I don't know how successful water infection, blah, blah, blah. But the mortality rate, for example, out at Camp Letterman was 6%.
Yes. Yeah.
And those were the hard cases.
Yes.
Those were the guys who couldn't move.
Yes.
With the Army. 6% died.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that means
94%
didn't die.
That's correct.
Which is really astounding to me, because the impression we've always been led towards is that Civil War medicine was so barbaric, so primitive, that everybody, it was worse to go to the hospital because you probably were going to die from that.
Yeah, a lot of people would say that.
Right. And an earlier episode we did, I believe it was the one that we did in the barn at the Spangler farm, is when I had my mind blown when you told us that 30% of amputations resulted in death. Only 30. And I was like, I figured it would have been the other way around.
No, it was lower than that.
Lower than
amputation survival rates were 20% for the Confederates, and the death rate was 20% for Confederates and 10% for Union. So 90% of Union soldiers who had an amputation. Now we have to specify that that's the surgery we're talking about.
Right.
Survived that. Now, having said that, I will tell you also, though, because of no knowledge of antibiotics, no knowledge of sterile technique, 80% of people got infected, but 90% of people survived. Just because you got infected doesn't mean you're going to die.
Correct, right. Wow. I mean, but that's so fascinating to me that it was that good. So we're going to hear about some wounds now that are kind of, they're all over the place, I'm sure, right?
They are.
Some are... What would you say? Like on a scale of 1 to 10 in severity, are these between the 5 and 10 range?
Oh, I'd say some of them are a 2 and some of them are 10. The other thing that I'd like to do, because I think it adds to a little bit more information medically, is not just talk about wounds, but the medical illnesses that some of these, especially well-known Confederate generals had. I think it adds to what you learn about them from a medical point of view.
I see a picture of Robert E. Lee there. So
that's good. You recognized him.
Yeah. I'm like, this guy looks familiar.
Yeah,
is
he
that Lee?
does. Yeah, that is Lee.
So he has a medical condition coming here. And let's start with this. Let's start from the top down.
Yeah.
Because then there's a really bad dad joke here, but you know how they say that runs downhill. And so we're going to start with Robert E. Lee. Now, we all famously know that he had diarrhea while here at Gettysburg.
But who didn't?
But I was just going to say, who didn't have diarrhea? Who among us here at Gettysburg does or did not have diarrhea?
Well, it was so very common, and it almost... Well, it's a disease, but it's so common that it's almost treated like just
the way it is.
The way it is. But
back then they called it regular.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And just so the listeners know, I'll just define it. Everybody knows what diarrhea is. Dysentery is diarrhea with blood in it. That's the only difference. And it tends to be more serious.
Now, you say the only difference, but the cause has to be different too, right? I mean, like diarrhea I could get from a variety of things, but dysentery, isn't it its own specific thing? Isn't it like an inflammation of something or other?
It's generally, dysentery is usually caused by a bacteria. It's an infection. And to some degree, diarrhea can be the same, but it's not usually as advanced as dysentery.
Okay. And what would be, like today, if you had dysentery, what would be the cure? Antibiotics?
Yeah, antibiotics. I mean, if you get food poisoning from Shigella or something like that, that's a form of dysentery. But dysentery isn't as common as it was back then because there's a way to treat it.
Right, okay. And then so back then they would either die or heal.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't something you would live with for the rest of your life. I mean, you would if you died.
If you got not so bad dysentery that it didn't kill you, you could have recurrent bouts of diarrhea that would affect you the rest of your life.
Okay.
And it could lead to chronic problems. Many people are familiar with family or friends who have inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis,
sure.
Crohn's disease.
Yeah.
In some ways, that's kind of similar to dysentery, although it's an inflammatory disorder. But certainly diarrhea was very common, and we think that Lee was afflicted here on day 2, probably with significant diarrhea. There are accounts of one of Stewart's staff men who finally got here, who was trying to give a message to Lee to tell him where Stewart was, and he could hardly find Lee because he was running back and forth to
really?
Yeah.
To relieve himself.
Exactly, yeah.
So we know about this diarrhea, obviously, because there are people who have commented on it.
Right. And on day 2, it's pretty well known. I mean, he issued one order and he received one order. It's not like he was in the middle of the decision making once the day went on and he became more afflicted.
That's amazing to me that, you can run a battle. He really tried to. I mean, like you just pointed out, he really wasn't doing a lot on the second. But the traveling with that has got to be a nightmare. Now we don't know exactly where that came from. I've heard people say, I probably ate a bad cherry on the way, but that's we don't know this.
No, we don't. And there were so many different causes for it that it's hard to say, oh, well, that's from that sandwich he ate or that piece of fruit he ate.
Right. Could have been water. Could have been fruit. It could have been God knows what else.
Right.
What about, since we're on bowel issues right now, and hopefully this will be the last of them, what about parasites? Was that a common thing? I mean, would they not have even known about that?
Well, they wouldn't have known about it because they didn't know about microscopes exist, but there were only about maybe 30 in the U.S. Medical Corps.
Oh.
And when you looked through a microscope, if you were a pretty smart medical guy, you could see parasites. Malaria is from a parasite.
Right.
And amoebic dysentery, amoeba is a parasite. So they knew about them, but they didn't really know what they were and especially how to get rid of them. Right.
So if you did, and I'm sure people did get parasites back then. I mean, you're drinking out of creeks.
Right.
And, I mean, you have to, right?
Right.
I had one, and the state called me because it's a reportable infection. And they asked me if I had gone swimming in any lakes or creeks. And I was like, it's December.
Right. Probably not.
It's like, no. Well, did you go out of the country? Like, no. No, I don't know where I got it from. Probably a lemon. That's what I could think of. Is I got it. I had to, because all of the things that they asked about, I didn't do.
Okay.
So the only thing I did do was go out to eat.
Right.
And I get water or club soda or something with a lemon. And I always squeeze the juice out and throw the lemon in.
Right.
I stopped doing that, because that's the only thing I can think of.
And you read about, the recall from different restaurants. I mean, sometimes that's a big problem.
Yeah. But the guys back then had to, I mean, they were in such high risk of getting those things that they had to have them. And I mean, I know some of them just die on their own.
Right.
6 weeks and then it lives out its life and you're done.
Right.
But I mean, they can do damage though. I mean,
for sure.
They can really weaken you.
They can take up residence in your liver. They can certainly in your bowel. You can get a brain abscess from amoeba, which is a type of a parasite. So it for sure can do that.
Yeah. So, okay. So Lee, but I know you weren't mentioning, or you didn't have Lee in there to talk about diarrhea.
No.
You want to talk about angina? Is that what it was?
Well, let me just mention, I mean, and I think most people notice this or know about this. He did suffer, he was a very healthy guy up until before the Civil War. He was involved in building a fort down on Baltimore Harbor, and he got malaria. And that was his first significant medical problem. But then he had recurrent things. And right before Antietam, he was thrown off a Traveler and broke one wrist, sprained another wrist. To be honest with you, Matt, I'm not sure in 1862 how they knew that one was broken and one was sprained. They didn't have any X-ray. But he couldn't ride the horse. And he traveled in an ambulance for a while. But like everything orthopedically, that tended to heal itself. But in the spring of February, March, and into April, Lee became sick with shortness of breath, chest pain. At this point, he's in his early 50s. Well, he would be, 55 or so. And it's not clear when you read about it whether it was coronary artery disease with blockage of vessels, or whether he had a disorder called pericarditis, which is an inflammation of the sac around the heart that can be associated with other inflammatory problems like types of rheumatism, types of arthritis, and that still exists today, not very commonly, but it still exists. But, either way, he definitely had a cardiac problem towards the second half of the Civil War.
Now, you said, was it pericarditis or pericarditis?
Pericarditis.
Pericarditis.
The pericardium is the membrane that is over the top of the surface of the heart. And if it gets fluid in it, then you develop what's called pericarditis.
What's the difference between that and myocarditis?
Myocarditis is an inflammation of the heart muscle itself.
Aha.
Pericarditis is an inflammation of the lining over the heart.
Of the perineum.
Not the perineum. We're up much higher than that.
Okay.
We already talked about diarrhea, Matt. That's enough.
Right. Let's move up on the body. So those symptoms that he has, the shortness of breath, the chest pains, what is it?
That's a good question. And I don't know how many of the people listening are avid readers of Gettysburg Magazine. If you're not, you should be. There was an article written, I have the reference somewhere, where a physician wrote about Lee's problem.
Okay.
And did it make a big difference? I think he had coronary artery disease. I think he had blockages. Today he would have needed a stent, and if it was multiple blockages, he might have needed bypass surgery.
Now, what makes you say that?
Because when he would exert himself, he would get short of breath. It would hurt. And if you read about his health the last year he's alive, he can't walk very far without sitting down to rest. And then he ultimately dies of a stroke, and that's all tied into problems with circulation. Now, if he has a type of arthritis, and there are any number of medical diseases that could do this, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, something called ankylosing spondylitis, which affects the back, you could get pericarditis from that. But I just think his symptoms are more consistent with coronary artery disease and a blockage of his coronary arteries.
So, and is that, what is angina? Because I've heard that word.
It's pain you get from blockage in your coronary arteries. So it's on the same spectrum.
So it's a symptom of coronary artery disease.
That's correct.
Aha. Okay.
And if it continues unaddressed, eventually, angina means that your heart is straining and you're having pain because of it. If you ultimately don't attend to it and you have permanent damage in the muscle in your heart, that's a heart attack. That's a myocardial infarction. And so it's a spectrum that goes from angina all the way to permanent muscle damage in the heart.
And I know this word came up in a previous episode and you defined it and I forgot it. Infarction is dead tissue. Okay. All right. So Lee's got these heart issues. Now, here's what's astounding to me about Lee in this case with the heart. He's the commander of a rebel army. Okay. You don't know that you're not going to be hanged if this doesn't go your way, right? So, I mean...
I think he expected to be.
Right. So, I mean, this is a pretty scary endeavor. You're now in the field with an army, and you're getting to know these men. You're ordering their death. And I know in the movie, Martin Sheen says, we love the army, and we must be willing to order the death of the thing we love and everything. And while that may be true, that doesn't mean that doesn't weigh on your heart, right? These are young men. You're sending them to their death. There's the stress of, are we going to win it? And make those losses worth it. And my point is, the man is under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, emotionally, physically, mentally. I mean, being in the field, what is 56 here?
Yeah, he's 56.
I believe, yeah.
Meade is 47.
56 years old here, which back then was like 85.
Right.
He's 56 years old. He's riding on a horse or in an ambulance, moving from A to B. That's not the easiest way to travel, either one of them.
Gosh, no, but it's how you traveled.
It's how you did, right? And he's living in a tent, and just all this. That is not. good for the body, especially a body with a weakened heart. It's amazing to me that he survived not only the end of the war, but until what, 1870?
1870 is when he died.
Yeah. So, I mean, that I don't know. Well, that speaks for something. I don't know what exactly.
It's interesting because when you read about Lee and his personality, we tend to see him as the Martin Sheen guy who's praying a lot and that sort of thing. He had a hell of a temper. And there were certain people that he really had a hard time with. General A.P. Hill was one of them. I mean, at least twice, if not three times in the Civil War, he lit into him about decisions that he made. And after one of the fights in the fall after Gettysburg, let's bury these men and say no more about this at Bristow Station.
Right.
And then later in 1864, in the Overland Campaign, the North Anna Battle. Now I know I'm off of the Gettysburg site. He was absolutely furious with A.P. Hill at that battle and said, "Why didn't you blah 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 like Jackson would have?" And so he was very. I mean, his temper was short with certain people, and that certainly didn't help his heart either.
No, I'm sure. So Lee's got the heart issue. He doesn't receive a wound here, but it's worth mentioning his medical condition.
And in the Civil War, Robert E. Lee really is not significantly injured in battle. Right. I mean, he goes up front a couple times where his soldiers want him to go to the rear, lead of the rear. Right. Other than the injuries he sustained when he fell off his horse, his medical issues were diseases. Yeah. Diseases.
Who else do you have?
I just went down the list. I got Longstreet next, but I don't know why, because he didn't have any injuries here at Gettysburg. I actually put him down there because, and there's a time and a place to do this, but not today. He was actually ripped apart mentally with the decisions made here. And I think you can actually make a case that all of these guys had some degree of PTSD, but I would imagine Gettysburg weighed heavily on James Longstreet's mind.
Well, how about, didn't he, speaking of things weighing on his mind, didn't his most of his family die during the winter of that year? Or when was that?
Two or three of his four children died in, I think, a scarlet fever epidemic, and it changed him, as you would expect. Right. And then his wife dies in the late 1880s, I think. I mean, he's just got one surviving child until he remarries later in his life.
So I'm sure that's not putting him in the best of moods, and then he's got to come up here. Right. Okay.
And then just going down the line of his staff, and I know there's a question about this later on. Richard Ewell obviously sustained a significant injury at Second Bull Run, and as an orthopedist, when I read through that injury, I shudder. I mean, he was shot in the knee, and his kneecap was in two pieces, but the whole upper half of his shin bone, his tibia, was in about 7 pieces. And so if there was any doubt as to what you needed to do with that, there's no way to put that back. Yeah, we have and I'll apologize ahead of time. This isn't very professional. In my specialty, when we are called by the emergency room for a motorcycle accident, we come in, or they send us the picture on the computer. There are the x-rays. There are the crap x-rays. And then there are the shit x-rays. Ewell had an OS injury. But as we know, he was off for a long time. He came back maybe a changed man because of his injury, and then subsequently getting married. And he probably wasn't the same commander that he was prior to his injury when he commanded under Jackson.
His injury was caused by artillery, or
no? It was a rifle.
It was.
Let me just double check.
Double check that there.
That's a pretty good shot.
I have gunshot wounds. I think it was
a gunshot wound.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Wow, that's some pretty bad damage.
Yeah.
It must have hit right in the right spot, right?
Yeah, probably. I mean, if I was to go back and try to reconstruct that, the bullet would have hit the upper end of the tibia where it shattered it into all of those pieces and broke the kneecap just into two pieces.
Right.
That's not a big deal, a kneecap in two pieces. You can put that together.
Today?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not then.
No, not then. But it's not my favorite operation to do because you got to use wires, and I don't like wires. And that's just my bias. But to put a shattered tibia or shin bone back together, it can be done, but it ain't easy. It ain't easy.
I mean, the pain of being shot in the knee has got to be one of the worst.
Yeah.
I mean, I just bumped my knee on, a table corner or something.
Yeah.
And I'm crying like a baby.
Yeah. Bone pain is pretty severe.
Yeah.
And it's not the bone itself so much as the lining over the bone, a thin membrane called the periosteum, the covering of the bone. It's full of nerves.
Yeah.
And that's why when you break something, the pain is pretty much pretty out of proportion to what you might expect.
So it's not that the bone itself feels the pain from the break.
There are nerve cells in the bone, but most of the nerves are in the lining over the bone, the periosteum.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see A.P. Hill's face there.
Yeah.
Is that who's next?
Yeah, he's a truly interesting guy from both an injury point of view and a medical point of view. He dies, he's shot about 5 to 7 days before the surrender at Appomattox.
Yeah.
When he and one of his aides go riding out of the house and confront Union guys outside of Petersburg, and the Union guy shoots him through his thumb and into his heart, and he's dead right away. Yeah. But he had been... Most people know this story. What's this saying?
Youthful indiscretion?
Yeah, youthful indiscretion and a night with Venus and lifetime with Mars,
Mercury.
With Mercury, right. Yeah. He acquired venereal disease, whatever we say venereal disease is, when he was a plebe at West Point, and he got gonorrhea. And there's no cure for gonorrhea in 1860, just like there aren't any other infectious diseases. And that can lead to permanent kidney problems. And some of the things I've read about Hill are that when he was killed, his kidneys were failing. He would, if it was now, well, he wouldn't have gotten to where he is now, but he would need to go on dialysis if he was that sick with his kidneys.
That's amazing to me. So his kidneys are failing at the point that he dies. Mm-hmm. Do you think maybe it was just like he didn't care?
I think that's a really interesting question, Matt, because I think it's more complicated than that. It may be, I'm dying, I think, and I don't care. But I also think, and I think we have touched on this, I think he also had syphilis. And syphilis, you don't know when you get a venereal disease, do you just get gonorrhea, or do you just get syphilis, or do you get both? Or there are other types of VD to get as well. But the thing about syphilis is it can cause you brain damage and affect your thinking pretty significantly. And
but isn't that the end stage of syphilis? Like don't you get all the blister? Yeah. What are they?
The first thing that happens is you get a sore on your hem-haw, and then
what you get a.
I'm a doctor. You get a sore on your penis that doesn't hurt. Now, I don't know how you don't notice that.
Your hem-haw.
Yeah.
But it doesn't hurt. It's not a painful one.
No. Unlike a sore associated with gonorrhea, that is painful.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, so wait, I thought gonorrhea was just like a bacterial infection.
It is. Oh. It is. But the sores that it causes on your genitals are painful. With syphilis, it's called a chancre.
This sounds.
I know, but it doesn't hurt. Pardon me if I have a sore as big as my thumb on my penis, I'm going to notice it.
So you're saying that it gets to be that big?
It can,
but yet it doesn't hurt.
Correct.
Is it like a blister?
And then sometimes it's like a blister that's ruptured and there's a sore. Now, I want you to remember, I'm a bone surgeon.
I know,
okay?
I know.
And I'm not talking about...
You're not a
I'm talking about
surgeon.
bones, right?
Yeah.
And then it becomes... it goes away.
I'm going to have to put a parental advisory on this episode.
You may have to. But this is all medical. And
Right.
But then people get a rash from syphilis that is around for a while, and then it goes away. And I forget the percentage. It's less than 25% of people go on to develop what's called tertiary syphilis, where it's not really a bacteria. It's more like a parasite, gets into your brain and affects your thinking and your decision making. And
Oh my God!
that sort of.
What a weird disease.
Yeah.
So, and is that started as a bacterial infection too, or is it a viral infection?
It's not a viral infection. It's caused by a bug called treponema, and it's kind of like a parasite. It's bigger than a bacteria, but and you could see it under a microscope pretty easily.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's not quite a bacteria. It's not. It's a parasite.
Correct. Treponema pallidum is the medical name for it, and it's bigger than a bacteria.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
And the amount of time that all these different the painless sore in your hem haw, and then the rash, and then the other sore, and then the brain. It's how long a period is it? A lifetime? Or
5
is
to
it
20 years.
Okay, so
Yeah, it can be a long time.
so you wouldn't necessarily think that all these things are related to one instance.
No, if he got syphilis at the same time that he got gonorrhea, that would have been 20 years before the Civil War.
Or since. He could have
Yeah,
gotten it since.
Absolutely.
Right.
Now, there's evidence that speaks against it because he fathered 3 daughters and got married, or vice versa, got married and fathered 3 daughters. And if he had syphilis, maybe you can still have a family if you have syphilis, but
Well, sure.
but
But would they
not
be
always.
a happy and healthy family?
Yeah, they usually are.
It's funny because we just did an episode on AP Hill on Saturday or Sunday, and we were talking a little bit about his VD, not from a medical perspective, but the theory of syphilis also came up in that episode, and I was like, and then he got married? Like, that poor woman. Do we know anything about her medical
That's a
situation?
good question. I'm not aware that it was ever documented that she acquired syphilis or even gonorrhea, but it certainly is possible. I don't remember. I don't have much on her in terms of her history. Now, you got to look at Hill's commanding history. Early in the war, the first half of the war, he's a very aggressive, red jersey, go get them, let's kick the crap out of them, brigade and division commander. When he's bumped up to corps level, now he's sick a lot. He's where is he here? We all ask each other, where is
Right.
he? And that only gets worse through the rest of the Civil War. And there's an article, and I would refer people who are interested in this topic to Gettysburg Magazine, issue number 55. There's an article about his medical history, and they look at his signature over the course of about 4 or 5 years and how it goes downhill. And his writing is much less legible. Maybe his decision-making is less clear and less aggressive than it was in the first part of his career. And so I personally think he was not the commander that he was early in the Civil War, later in the Civil War, and something caused that.
It's amazing. Now we've got Lee and AP Hill, who sound like they're waging this war on death's door. Like they're in bad health.
Right.
And in these high stress situations, AP Hill, this is what I wanted to ask you about him. Okay, so we always like to dwell on the VD. Mm-hmm. But wasn't he shot through the calves at Chancellorsville?
Yeah, he was. He was shot through both calves, and that's why he had to give up command after Stonewall Jackson got hurt. Hill was in charge, and then he, as you said, he got shot through the thighs, and that's when Jeb Stuart.
The thighs or the calves?
No, the calves.
Oh, okay.
But they were flesh wounds. He recovered quite quickly. They were fractures, and that's why Jeb Stuart took over Jackson's corps at Chancellorsville.
I would imagine, though, by July of 1860, it's only 2 months. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got to still be a little sore when you walk.
Yeah,
it's your muscle, right?
Yeah,
or was it a graze of the skin?
I don't know. I suspect it wasn't all that bad because he's accompanying his troops up into Pennsylvania by mid-June, a month later. I think that's one of the things I would urge people if they want to read about this stuff. Look at the dates of these injuries and when the commanders, the soldiers even, are back doing what they're doing. Because I can tell you, if you are shot through the thigh or you're shot through the femur, that's a whole different ball of wax. If you're shot through the thigh, and we'll talk about that with some of these Confederate guys, you're going to be workable again in 3 or 4 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks maybe. But
the calf.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if it involves the tibia, the bone below the knee, or the femur, especially above the knee, you're not going to be functioning for 3 to 6 months. if you are then.
Okay. Who else you got?
I'm just going down my list here.
We're still dealing with health issues. We're not even on Gettysburg wounds yet.
Yeah, right.
This is an unhealthy
here I have a Gettysburg wound, but we already did a session on it. John Bell Hood's arm injury, so I won't go into a lot of detail on that. But
people can refer to that for more detail. But go ahead, just give us
Most of us have the impression that John Bell Hood had a devastating injury on the afternoon of July 2nd, just as Longstreet's attack starts down near the Bushman farm at the far south of the attack. And if you go to history books now, 10 years ago, 25 years ago, 40 years ago, you'll read about how his arm was useless. It didn't work. Some of the historical accounts even say that the arm was amputated.
Right.
And none of that is true.
Right.
There are letters that exist that include the medical reports of what happened to Hood's arm here, and it was not nearly as bad as people think. He did sustain an injury. They took him off the field. They didn't amputate his arm. They did what's called a resection, where they removed part of the damaged bone and then sewed it up. And by the end of September, he's on his horse down at Chickamauga and loses his leg to an amputation down there. And by Christmas, his arm is working normally again. Actually, in September, it probably is working normally again.
So the resection.
Yes.
Let's say it takes out this, 2 inches of
it was about 4 inches of bone.
4 inches of bone.
Yeah. Right below the elbow.
So now, does that mean I have like a noodle arm?
No, because there's 3 bones in the elbow joint, the one from above and 2 from below. They took out 4 inches of one of the bones down below, which meant the other one wasn't hurt, which means he could flex, he could bend his elbow virtually normally. He lost some rotation in his forearm. But most importantly, Matt, his hand worked normally. 95% normal function. And so
where does this idea come from that he had this useless arm or that an amputated arm or? Well,
the original records don't talk about how severe the wound was. In fact, it's described by some of his peers as not that bad of an injury at the time. But it was around the time that everybody was going after Longstreet and Hood that people started to write about the devastating wound that Hood had. Now, Hood dies of a yellow fever attack in the 1880s. In fact, he and his wife and their oldest daughter all die within 2 days of each other.
Right.
And it's after that the historians start to talk about, well, Hood must have had a severe injury, because at Franklin, when he ordered that massive charge where more generals died than in Pickett's charge, he had to be addicted to drugs. He had to be on laudanum.
Right.
He had to be making crazy decisions.
Yeah.
None of that's true.
Yeah.
None of that's true. So it's a very interesting topic to read about. For me, it was really interesting because I realized, God, what can I believe that I read? You know?
Yeah.
Well, it is what it is.
That's the more I'm learning about the Battle of Gettysburg, the less I believe about any history I read.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that as we go down the list.
I do this under protest.
Okay, so folks, if you want to hear more about General Hood's wound, we go into more detail about it. There's an episode about it. I think it came out last year. You know, just search wherever you're listening to the show. Yeah. Just search for it and just put General Hood in.
And if you believe in reading.
If you believe in reading,
Gettysburg Magazine, issue number 68, there's an article in there that I wrote about it.
All right, number 68.
It talks a little bit about the wound, but it's mostly about the historiography of how did this happen? How come everybody thinks that his arm was completely useless afterwards, and it wasn't.
You know, when we get authors on the show, I get them on because the publisher sends me free copies of the book, and then I invite the author on. Gettysburg Magazine, why aren't they sending me free copies of the magazine?
I don't know. You know,
because there'd be great subjects to put on the show.
It's a very good publication.
Yeah, it is.
And I have a complete set of it. I started getting it in 1988, and I've never not gotten it. I don't think it's quite as good as it was when it first came out, but there's a lot of information that's already been covered. But
it's also the information that, you're right. Like a lot of information has already been talked about, and how many more times can you go over troop movements? Right. But also the focus of what people are interested in or what historians are writing about today is different.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's more social than it is military.
Yeah.
And if it is military, it's through a social lens.
Right. It's my wife often said when we made this move and she was willing to come along, I'm not interested in the right flank, the left flank, or any of that. Tell me some stories about people.
Yeah.
And that's just the opposite of what I'm interested in.
Right, me too.
But you're right. That's what people want to hear about.
But I think the beauty of it is that more people are getting interested in it because of that. Because it's not just military movements. I mean, when we do our Get Out of the Car tours, I don't know if it's 50-50, but there is a large percentage of the group that is female. And I mean, we're going around talking, battle, but Lewis Trott always makes sure to add human interest stories and talking. And he was a grunt, so he's talking about the grunts, and I think that's what translates. That's what attracts them. Well,
and I would tell people who are interested in becoming a guide that, speaking from experience, not everybody, in fact, not that many people are interested in the black and white of the battle. They want to hear the story.
That's sad.
And I agree, but it's what it takes to be a guide, because otherwise people are falling asleep in the back of the car. I'll tell one funny story.
I don't got time for that.
When I had a guy who I knew from Johnstown. It was an older gentleman. He's a retired physician, and he wanted to go on a tour, and I was still practicing. And so we're driving around.
Practicing to be a guide or practicing as a doctor?
I had passed the written.
Okay.
And I was
so you're practicing for the oral. Okay.
Right. And so we go over to Culp's Hill, and I look over, and he's sound asleep in the seat next to me. So I'm thinking, how do I wake this guy up? So I slammed on my brakes, and he went forward, and it woke him up. But that's exactly what you don't want to do on a tour. It's got to be better than that. So
yeah, it's got to be tough for being a guide now, because I bet you a lot of guys are studying based on the influences they had as tourists, as visitors, whether it's watching people like Gary and Tim on YouTube, or coming here and taking tours with the older guys. That group is different than the group that they're looking for now, from what I understand. Right. They're looking for a more human interest, less military tactics. You have to know it all still.
Yes, you do. And then you got to read the room as to what do they want. Is this three guys from Iowa who want to hear all about the right flank, the left flank, and who was going here? Or is this, two kids who want to be at Hershey Park that I need to tell you about how people get their heads blown off down here?
Yeah, it's that's why I think if I pass the written, I'll be fine. But I don't think I'm going to do well because I can't prepare for an audience, but I can read an audience in the moment.
Well, you're right. You'll be fine with the oral, but I would tell you this.
I don't think I will. No, I'm saying I won't be.
With the oral?
Yeah.
You think
because I have to prepare it in advance. I'm not a guy who prepares things in advance. I can't do it because every time I do it, then I become so reliant on the script.
Yeah,
that I can't improvise, and I'm a good improviser. That's my strength.
Well, that's going to be your strength on the oral exam. The written test is totally different, and I know you've heard this, but you got to throw out all of that stuff on the written test when it comes time for the oral.
But don't you have to, for the oral, don't you have to prepare a tour on a theme?
Yes, but it's not a black and white theme that everybody does the same.
No, I know.
They give you a script, if you will, and that's what you do. The whole key is to tell the story of what happened here. And it doesn't have to be incredible detail. In fact, it shouldn't be incredible detail.
Right. All right, well, we'll see. We'll see. It'll be an interesting experiment.
Well, I will tell you this. Your knowledge of basic facts in this battlefield is much, much improved from when you started this. 5 years ago?
Yeah, 6 years ago.
When I listen to you now, you know so much more, and that'll be great for the written test. And it's not going to be that helpful for the oral exam.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah. I was also playing dumb a lot in the beginning.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, it came out well.
Because I don't want to be seen as an expert.
Okay.
Because when you put yourself out that way, then people hold you to a different standard.
Right.
And I'm not an expert, but I mean, I'm not now I'm just less afraid to show that I know things.
Well, that's okay. There's a lot of us like that.
All right. So moving on. So let's get to some of these, unless you want to go through a couple more health issues.
No, pretty much everybody I got left is injuries.
All right. Let's get to those injuries then. Let's get to some of those.
How about Dorsey Pender?
Dorsey Pender, great one. Let's start with that.
It is a very interesting one. So he is commanding in Hill's Corps. He's demanding a division. And on July 2nd, when the battle starts down at the southern end of the field, he turns to his aide and says, Major, this indicates an assault, and we will ride down our line. So picture yourself over on West Confederate Avenue.
Doing it.
Near the McMillan House.
Mm-hmm.
He and his aides start to go south. And he takes a shot, a piece of shrapnel, into his left thigh. Okay? It doesn't hit his femur, so it doesn't break his thigh bone. It doesn't hit one of the major blood vessels, so he's not bleeding to death. But there's some thought that there may have been a fuse on that piece of shrapnel, which may have made it a bigger wound. The wound wasn't real big. It was about 2 inches long was all.
Okay.
But when it went into his thigh, it started to cause a pretty big hematoma, a collection of blood in his thigh.
Right.
And when you read the accounts, his leg was so sore the next day on July 3rd, he couldn't get on his horse. And that's why he's not working, if you will, on July 3rd, and why Trimble is taking over 2 of the 4 brigades in his division. He doesn't want to stay here in Gettysburg. He's getting worse and worse. So they put him in a wagon, and they take him south. And he's actually, who's he in the wagon with? They take him over to one of the hospitals on the west side of town. And then when he's taken out of town, they take him down through Winchester. His thigh is getting bigger. It's bleeding more. And again, there are no blood vessel injuries of size. It didn't break his thigh bone. His femur isn't broken, but he's got this big hematoma that's now starting to bleed.
Now, a hematoma, you say, is a collection of blood?
Correct.
Is that also a bruise?
A bruise would be a collection of blood below the skin that you can see in the skin.
Okay.
Technically speaking, that's kind of what a hematoma is, only it's down inside of the muscles.
So, okay, so he's got there's nothing they can do to drain that, or?
Yeah, there could be. If it was 2024, and let's just say he's a 65-year-old guy who's on a blood thinner for blood clots, and he gets a hematoma, if we had to, we could take him to the operating room and open that up and drain that out of there and see where the bleeding is coming from and stop it. In 1863, could they do that? No.
Okay.
No, they couldn't.
So he's just got to sit there and suffer with this expanding leg.
Right. And they probably put ice on it, and they tried to do everything they could to stop the bleeding. But it is getting worse, and they go down. Do
they remove the shrapnel?
No, I'm not aware that they did any surgery on it right away.
Oh wow! So he's traveling down to
the Shenandoah Valley, where I-81 is,
with this shrapnel still in him.
Yeah.
So they'd done nothing but put a bandage on him.
Right, and wrapped it probably with a pretty significant bandage to try to give it some pressure. But it's bleeding more and more and more. And they finally get down to Stanton, Virginia, and it's bleeding copiously. And so in order to try to save Pender's life, they do an amputation. Or they do an amputation, but now the bleeding is so advanced that they can't control it. And he ends up dying from hemorrhage from that wound.
So now they amputate. Where they amputate? Like on the thigh?
Yes.
Like so, it's a high.
It's high, and as we've talked about, the higher it is up the extremity, the less likely it is that you're gonna live. Now, at this point,
why is that? By the way,
I think it's because actually that's one of the questions.
Oh, okay. We'll get to it. We'll leave it for them.
Yeah.
By the way, from here to Stanton, Virginia, is 228 miles, 3 hours and 32-minute car ride.
Okay,
that's with an interstate. That's with cars.
Right.
He's taking a wagon.
And I was just looking to see the date of his surgery. It was like 2.5 weeks later.
Oh, my God.
And interestingly, we're going to talk, I think, some about General Scales and his injury.
Yeah.
They shared a wagon.
Oh, really?
Pender and Scales were in the same wagon together. Just like Hood was in the same wagon with the cavalry general.
Hampton?
Yes. Yeah, they shared a wagon. But he hemorrhages to death. They can't stop him from bleeding. There's a couple of pretty neat quotes. The last thing Pender said before they put him to sleep was, "Tell my wife that I do not fear to die. I can confidently resign my soul to God, trusting in the atonement of our Lord Jesus Christ. My only regret is to leave her and our 2 children. I have always tried to do my duty in every sphere of life in which Providence has placed me." So he knew that he was probably not going to live. And then very interesting.
It's got to be a hard thing to write.
Yes. Oh, especially if you are pretty sure you're not going to wake up.
That's what I'm saying. Like, knowing that this is like one of the last things that you're going to do.
Right. And then after he died, after the war, actually, Robert E. Lee wrote, and I think this is, I don't know how many people have seen this. I think this is pretty interesting. This is Lee. "I ought not to have fought the Battle of Gettysburg. It was a mistake. But the stakes were so great I was compelled to play. For had we succeeded, Harrisburg, Baltimore, and Washington were in our hands, and we would have succeeded had General Pender lived."
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what Lee thought of Pender.
Huh. Do you believe that?
Nah,
I don't either.
but we'll throw the credit Pender's way that Lee thought that.
Yeah. So wow, poor Pender. I mean, 2.5 weeks after receiving the wound, that distance traveled on roads of various quality in a wagon with this painful wound.
Yes.
That's enough to feel bad for him. But then when you think his parents named him Dorsey, then you really feel bad for him.
And he was not a lucky guy. He had been wounded at the 7 days. He had been knocked off his horse at 2nd Manassas. He had a gunshot wound at Fredericksburg. He was hit in the arm at every major battle he was in. Something happened to the guy until he finally dies at Gettysburg.
Jesus. That's tough, though. That sounds like pure hell.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't even have ibuprofen back then.
No. they did not have ibuprofen. Right? That's right.
I mean, you had other things, but they were dangerous.
Yeah, and if you had it, you really didn't know what it was a lot of times.
Yeah.
Especially the Confederates, because they're out of stuff. They're making stuff out of plants and actually doing pretty well with it, but it was not as scientific as what the North had.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Who's next?
I've got all 3 brigade commanders under Pickett.
Oh, that's good.
We can talk about some of them, all of them, but let's talk about Richard Garnett.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about Garnett. If I'm on a tour and I have a fairly knowledgeable group, they're going to know that Garnett was blown away by canister up at the Angle.
Right.
That's what the books say, and
not a trace.
No, couldn't even find the guy, and his horse was covered with blood, red eye, and they showed it in the movie.
Horse is just covered in blood.
Yeah.
Somehow survives the canister, but there's not a trace of Garnett.
Right. That's probably not true. Garnett gets up to about 20 paces or so at the Angle and is urging his men forward. Now, remember, he's on his horse because he's either sick, which I don't really believe in July on an 87-degree day you're going to have a buttoned-up jacket. I think the better explanation is he was kicked in the ankle by actually one of Pickett's staff men, which resulted in an ankle injury that he couldn't walk very well.
By one of Pickett's staffmen or staffman's horse?
No, I'm sorry, the horse. Okay. The staffman's horse, yeah, not the staff man himself.
I was like,
I think they
who kicks a guy in the ankles?
Yeah, well, the horse did. So Garnett's on his horse, and he's getting closer, and he's getting closer, and his aide, a guy named Private Irvine, witnessed Garnett's death. And Irvine is right next to Garnett when he sees Garnett be struck in the head by a minie ball. And when they hit the ground, Garnett is pretty much dead instantly by the time they hit the ground. Right. And Red Eye is on top of him, but gets off and goes further, and I don't know that that's Garnett's blood on Red Eye. It may be Red Eye's blood on Red Eye. But there were a couple of people that saw Garnett's death wound. The thing about the canister is that one of the soldiers in his division said that he had heard that he was shot through the body at the waist by grape shot. But there are at least 2 people who could see the head wound that Garnett suffered. And it was just rumor that he was hit with canister. Now, what happens is his body is stripped of all material, and nobody can identify him. Even his good friend in the U.S. Army, Henry Hunt, comes over after the charge and on July 4th looking for his friend's body, and he can't identify him either. So I don't think that he was killed by canister. I think he was shot by a minie ball.
And the picture that we believe is Garnett, is not this Garnet, correct?
Right. And that's very confusing.
Yes.
Garnet graduated from West Point.
So no wonder they couldn't find him. Everyone was looking for the wrong Garnet.
He was, right. He and his cousin, Robert Selden Garnet, not Richard Brooke Garnet.
There you go.
Robert Selden Garnet graduated from West Point the same year. And Robert Garnet was killed at a battle called Corrick's Ford in early July of 1861. So he was one of the first generals killed in the Civil War. But unfortunately, there's great confusion, and more often than not, the picture you see is not Richard Brooke Garnet. This is his picture here, but it's his cousin. And
can you take that out?
Surely.
Let me see. So we do have a picture of Richard Brooke Garnet.
This is Richard Brooke Garnet.
All right, let's see. All right, not much different than.
No, the other guy usually has a collar like from West Point, and he's got a different type of a beard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
I mean, considering we had the wrong picture to go off of for so long, the movie did a pretty good job.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's ironic that even though nobody could identify his body, people think that, well, he must have been vaporized by canister. And I don't think that was the case. I think his body was there. And I think his body was buried as an unknown out in the field by the Kadori farm and ultimately taken down to maybe Richmond.
Because his uniform was stripped and, so there's nothing to identify him. And, All right. So then Garnet, we believe, head wound.
Yes.
Not blown to bits by canister.
And that leads me into, and if you've ever been on a Pickett's Charge tour with Jim Hessler, he loves to talk about, okay, who were the 3 brigade commanders that were killed in Pickett's Charge? And Garnet, Armistead, who we're going to talk about. Then everybody thinks that Kemper is killed. Because in the movie, he says, well, they tell me this is mortal.
Right.
That is not the case. He survives.
Yeah.
The North Carolinian.
Which, by the way, that's another thing. I believe that after we don't see him again in the movie, I believe he goes off to die. And it wasn't until
you're talking about Kemper? Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started doing the show that I learned, no, he lived. And I was like, what?
Yeah. There was a 3rd brigadier general that died, and that was Marshall, who took over for Pettigrew.
So you never hear about him.
I know, but he's a big deal. He's the grandson of the Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall.
Thurgood.
Yeah. Not Thurgood.
Thurgood's later.
Yeah, much later.
Yeah.
But he's in the front row. We'll come to him in a minute. But the reason that I brought that up is Lawton's the next guy, not Lawton. Kemper is the next guy. Lawton is his middle name. That I was going to come to, because again, in the movie, everybody thinks he's got a mortal wound. He's on horse back, and he gets very close enough that he says, "I could see the eyes of the guy who shot me," and he shot in the. We've had this discussion before. He shot in the groin, and we know when you look at his injury, the bullet goes into his crotch. Well, actually, his groin, near his hip joint. It hits the femur bone. It doesn't break it, and then it deflects behind the abdominal cavity. Ugh. So it's not in the abdomen, but it's in the space behind the abdomen.
But no, wait. What do you mean the space behind the abdomen?
If I open up your abdomen as a general surgeon and I want to operate on your kidneys,
right,
or your pancreas, they're not in your abdomen. They're in a space called the retroperitoneum, which is behind the abdominal cavity.
So the perineum comes back.
Not the peritoneum, the peritoneum.
Oh, peritoneum. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, but wait a second. So the abdomen.
Yes.
Where all my guts are.
Yes.
That's not where my guts are.
It's where your guts are, but also behind it is another space where your kidneys and your pancreas is.
So there's 2 gut compartments.
Yes.
No kidding.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna look up for a diagram here. Abdomen. All right. Okay. So go ahead.
So you want to talk about the peritoneum, which is where your bowels are. And then the retroperitoneum, which is a medical word for the space behind the peritoneum.
Is that all one word?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where the kidneys and the pancreas are. And if you are shot in the retroperitoneum, that doesn't necessarily mean it's as likely you're going to die as if you're shot in the abdomen or the peritoneum.
Really?
Peritonitis,
Yeah.
an inflammation and infection of the abdominal cavity, happens in the peritoneum. It doesn't happen in the retroperitoneum. Now, being shot in that space behind the abdomen, the retroperitoneum, can be a problem. That killed Garfield.
Cat.
But that's where Kemper is shot. The bullet deflects and goes into the retroperitoneum. Now, why does that matter? That's where all the nerves are that go down to your leg. They don't go through your abdominal cavity. They're in the retroperitoneum after they come out of the spine, and they go down into the leg. And when you read about Kemper's wound, the one thing that stands out is all the pain that he had, the severe pain that he had. And it's because of the nerve injuries that he had. He was paralyzed from the waist down for a little while afterwards, but ultimately when his wound recovered, he never regained full use of his left leg because of nerve damage.
I'm surprised that's the least. I'm surprised that was the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think. I mean, that sounds like such a damaging wound.
Yeah, it could be, but again, it didn't go through the peritoneum or the abdominal cavity,
right,
where the colon is, where the small intestine is, where the stomach is, and so it's not going to spill stool out of the wound because that's in a different cavity,
and that causes a big problem.
Right?
What is that, sepsis that leads to?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking at a cross section here. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and the trade-off is your survival rate may be a little bit higher, but the nerve problem is going to be a big problem. When you read about Kemper's post-war career, he goes on to be the governor of Virginia, but he has a lot of pain in his left leg. He has a swimming pool built to exercise.
Really?
He has a lot of alcohol on board at the governor's mansion because that's what he is using to help quell some of the injury as well. But he survives his wound in Pickett's charge.
Huh. Yeah. Had a swimming pool.
Yeah, swimming pool. Not the one out here on... No. This was down at the governor's mansion in Richmond.
Huh. I wonder... that's interesting. Okay. All right. So, Kemper, Armistead. We've talked... I think we talked about Armistead before on another episode. Probably the Spangler episode.
Yeah, it was.
We were out at the barn.
I think there's some questions on it at the end, but it's... I'll get to that when we do that and make short work of it. He shouldn't have died of his wounds.
Yeah, that's what you were saying then.
Right.
So why? Wait, are you ready to move on to Armistead, or do you want to? You have somewhere else to go? Sorry, I didn't mean to lead you.
Let me just say this: Armistead had 2 soft tissue injuries. Neither one of them should have been fatal, but he dies 2 days later.
2 soft tissue injuries, which are what?
Bullet wounds that injured soft tissue muscles, but did not damage bones. Did not damage blood vessels. Basically, went into his his right forearm and his left calf, and did not cripple him with life-threatening injuries.
Armistead.
Oh,
I thought he got hit in the chest or something.
That's something that is open to discussion. If you read Ron Too Much for...
Yeah, Ron
Kirkwood's book. He's got a whole chapter on the death of Armistead, and most people feel that my rendition of that is probably accurate. There were some people who said he was hit in the chest, but nobody discovered it. The problem I have with that is if you're hit in the chest and nobody knows it for 2 days, I'm not sure that really, that
really
just doesn't make much sense. Yeah. It's very interesting. There are some books that say that he was shot in the chest twice. Again, as I say, I'm not sure that I believe that.
So then if he didn't die of the arm wound and he didn't die of the calf wound, what was it that killed him?
I think a blood clot to his lungs. Because he wasn't moving around very much. He's in the spring kitchen out at the Spangler farm, and he's 47 years old, and he's dehydrated, and he's laying under the window in the kitchen. And when you read the account of his death, it's very sudden. The doctor who's taking care of him is really surprised when Armistead just dies. He becomes confused. He becomes agitated during the night, and by the morning, he's dead.
And would that indicate a blood clot in the brain or anywhere?
Probably what's called a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that goes to the lungs. Yes. Right. Now, he could have had a stroke too, but my point here, Matt, is that when you die suddenly, that means that's a blood vessel related injury. You don't die suddenly of an infection. That's going to take a number of days.
Okay.
If you're shot in the chest and you die within 10 minutes, that's because a major blood vessel was hit at that time. We still nowadays, it's not common, thank God, but people still die of blood clots after arm and leg surgery, largely leg surgery. There's a famous sportscaster, I'm blanking on his name, who went in for a total hip and never came out.
Who was that? Was that Harry Carey?
No. His son is a sportscaster.
Oh, I don't know. Who?
Jeremy Schaff.
Anyway, but
it's indicative of what happens. Still, I used to tell my patients the risk of you getting a blood clot after a hip or knee replacement was about 5%. The risk of you dying of a blood clot was less than 1 in 100, but it's still there.
So you mean if you're one of the 5% that get a blood clot, you have a less than 1% chance of dying from it.
Right.
Because the hospital will catch it.
That's right. And then they'll put you on heparin or a blood thinner, and then you have to take that for a while until you come off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's what I think happened.
All right. So there's Armistead.
Right.
That's interesting, though. Yeah. So it's not...
So now we got all 3 of the brigade commanders under picket.
Right.
Okay. We doing okay time-wise?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Let me talk a little bit about a guy who was related to somebody in World War II. This is General George Patton's great uncle.
Okay.
Waller, not Walter, Waller Tazewell Patton, and he went by Tazewell. He was.
I would too.
Taz,
yeah.
He was the commanding officer of the 7th Virginia in Kemper's brigade.
So this is supposed to be, what's his name? Ted Turner in the movie.
That's right. That's right.
Or Ted Turner is supposed to be him, I guess.
Yes, that's my understanding as well. And he didn't go to West Point. He went to VMI. He goes up over the ridge over by the trees, and as he walks back past Major Deering, who's in charge of Pickett's artillery, Patton looks at Deering and says, "Well, I've been up yonder where they are, and this. I looked across at the Yankees. This ain't gonna be easy." And so when they start out, he gets as far as the Emmitsburg Road, and he gets to the fence. And as I tell people on tours, the problem there is they got to stop and they got to climb that fence. Well, when Patton is climbing the fence, he gets shot in the chest, which is a bad injury, but potentially a 1 out of 3 chance of surviving. But then his next injury is a cannonball takes off his jaw. And he's left with his tongue hanging out,
Oh,
and
God.
no jaw.
I have to tell you, Rick, that is my nightmare. The jaw, because I talk too much.
Well,
but also I like to eat.
So do I.
And also, I don't think I'm very good looking, so I need everything I could get. I need to keep that jaw,
I'm not going to comment one way or the other on that, man. But he survives for a period of time, and he's taken to the white building at Gettysburg College, the administration building, where he's nursed there, and he can't lie down because when he lies down, he can't breathe because his jaw is gone.
Oh my God!
And there's a nurse there.
It's like a horror movie.
It wasn't that unusual an injury.
I know.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you go to Civil War art from the time. You can find pictures down at Shiloh. There's a couple of pictures of guys who've had their jaws shot off. Now, they've died, but you'd be surprised how long the tongue is when the jaw is gone.
These are paintings or photographs?
They're paintings.
Paintings.
Yeah.
Of Shiloh.
Yes. Yeah.
Huh.
There's a nurse here by the name of Euphemia Goldsboro, and she writes a book. She sits with her back to Taz Patton for about 3 days.
She can't look at him.
Well, basically to keep him upright so that he can breathe.
Oh.
Because there's no way this guy can eat. Really, he could have killed himself if he was able, but he eventually starves to death.
Oh my God! Yeah. What a way to go!
And so he's taken back to Winchester, where he's from, and he's buried. And then, just as an aside, his older brother, also a George Patton, gets killed at Cedar Creek. And the family decides they're going to bury him with Taz. So when they open the grave to put in George Patton, his older brother, Taz Patton falls out of the casket, and so they have to put him back into the casket and then put his brother on top of him. So kind of an interesting little story.
So okay, let's go through, and I'm going to kick myself for asking this, but we must know. We're in the search of knowledge here. Okay. So you said it wasn't an uncommon, and I can't imagine it wouldn't be an uncommon wound, is the removal of a jaw. Mm-hmm. I want to say, I've alluded to this many times in the show, and I never went and actually found where I got it from, but I want to say that it's from E.P. Alexander, when he's placing the guns on July 3rd, and or in the morning, he's going and look at the lines, and he's in the peach orchard area, and he sees a man laying up against a fence, a post or whatever, sitting up against it, and he is missing his jaw, and he looks away and continues on, and then some movement catches his eye again, and he looks back and he sees that the man is alive. And he said that this image, of all the images he's seen, for some reason haunted him for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And I was like, I never thought of that. I never considered that. You never see that wound in the movies, right?
No.
So I'm like, oh man, yeah. They had to have been getting hit in the jaw.
Yeah.
And, you're not going to just get a little hole. I mean, maybe you will. Maybe, if you're lucky.
Yeah, it varies a lot.
Sure. But, I mean, those bullets, they're going to probably take that jaw away, clean off.
A good portion of it. Now, we think Tazewell Patton was hit by an artillery shell, which really took his whole jaw off. One of the things that comes out of the Civil War, and really any military conflict, are the advances in care of these injuries. And nobody would have had any idea how to address a facial or a jaw injury at the start of the Civil War, but plastic surgery as a specialty unto itself exists at the end of the Civil War, because they are doing reconstruction to restore jaws.
Really?
Yeah. The guy who did that was a plastic surgeon by the name of Gurdon Buck, B-U-C-K, in New York, who's best known in the orthopedic world, because when people break their hips nowadays and they come into the hospital, we put them in a splint that's called Buck's Traction. It's named after the same guy.
Okay.
He's more well known for plastic surgery than orthopedic surgery.
So I'm looking here at the anatomy of a jaw.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, so there's, you've got the bone itself.
Right.
But that bone has a lot attached to it, obviously.
A lot of muscles. A lot of teeth.
I mean, the tongue.
Yeah. Now, the tongue is actually attached much deeper down than just the bottom of your mouth.
Right. It's in your throat a little bit, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can see that.
You could lose your jaw and still have your tongue, but now there's nothing to hold the tongue into place.
That's what's so creepy.
In these pictures, you see these guys who are, their head is half gone. They're dead.
Yeah.
Their head is half gone and their tongue is hanging down to about their mid-chest.
And these are, you're talking about those Shiloh paintings.
Yes. Yeah.
I've never, and so that was a contemporary painting?
Yeah, there was an artist that drew the picture. I don't know the name of the artist.
Oh, man, I'd love to see that.
Drawings of Shiloh jaw injuries would probably bring it up.
Okay. Okay. So, but what is it like? Let's try to picture what this guy's going through. He's sitting there.
Yeah.
This nurse has to sit back to back with him so that he can breathe.
Yes.
He can't eat, can't drink, I'm sure.
That's correct.
Right? So he's dehydrating, he's starving. I guess he's not drooling.
No, there would be a lot of discharge, but I think we would have to call it something other than drooling.
Blood.
Yeah, blood.
Yeah.
And well, it's saliva, so I guess it
would there be saliva? Because, I mean, the jaw's gone.
Yeah.
So where's it coming out of? Aren't the glands?
Yeah, a lot of it would be coming up from his stomach, I would think, as well, almost like he was vomiting.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, pretty
what
miserable.
A mess. And how long did he linger for?
About 3 days.
Oh, just shoot me. Why wouldn't he just go shoot himself?
I don't know, because his arms worked, I guess. It just didn't give him a gun.
And it's like there's plenty of guns around.
Yeah, exactly.
He could still walk.
Yeah.
And he was also shot in the chest.
Yes. Yeah.
So he's got this chest wound that he's got to deal with as well.
Yeah.
And where in the chest did he get hit? Do we know?
It was Well, he didn't die right away from a chest wound, so it didn't hit the heart. It didn't hit the trachea. It didn't.
Was it maybe a spent bullet, or did it actually go in?
It might have gone in and gone out the back and not hit anything major. That might have been a survivable wound in and of itself.
But the jaw. Yeah. Wow. So the General Patton's great uncle,
suffered a jaw wound. Well, Ted Turner suffered a jaw wound.
Yeah.
Here at Gettysburg. Although they didn't show that in the movie.
No, sure. God forbid.
Right.
Wow, that's something else. Okay.
Just a couple more here. We talked about Colonel James Keith Marshall, who was in command of Pettigrew's brigade during Pickett's charge. He was from North Carolina, even though his family was from Virginia. He gets his guys all the way across the field, all the way across the road, and they get to the road and they get to the low ground right out in front of the angle when Captain Stockton Heath, who's the son of General Heath, comes up to Colonel Marshall and says, what are we doing? Where are we going? And Marshall looks at Heath and says, we do not know which of us will be the next to fall. And he's shot twice in the head, and he goes down right there. So, I mean,
great last words.
Yeah, the 3rd Brigade commander who's killed in Pickett's charge is under Pettigrew.
Yeah, and honestly, I probably have read that he died, but it feels like the first time that I'm hearing this.
Yeah.
Because you never hear this.
No,
you never hear. I mean, you really never hear anything about the Pettigrew Pickett column.
Yeah, and that's well, if people haven't read Jim and Wayne's book on Pickett's charge, they need to, because they really do a good job of addressing that that part of it. There's more troops on that side of Pickett's charge. There's 7,000 guys with Pettigrew and Trimble, and 5,000 with Pickett. But Pickett's from Richmond, where all the newspapers are, and so that's why he gets all the cred. Can I talk about one more?
Sure.
Isaac Trimble, and he's going to come up in the question.
This is a good one, yeah.
Yeah. He is wounded at the Second Manassas, Second Bull Run, in the left leg. He's hit right above the ankle. The bone is shattered, and the well-known Confederate surgeon, Hunter McGuire, decides he doesn't need an amputation. Now, if you ask me, why would you say that? I don't know. He's shattered his leg there. Maybe Hunter McGuire was too busy or something. I don't know. But Trimble's out of action for months, and he gets an infection, which was not unusual, which means he's got boils and he's got pieces of bone that are coming out, and that's why he loses his command and why he's by himself when he gets up here to Gettysburg. He's no longer capable of commanding in the field. But Isaac Trimble's a pretty stubborn guy.
Right. And
he comes up here looking for something to do. And, he tells Lee that Ewell screwed up. But I don't know that how strong that argument was when they really talked. But during Pickett's charge, as he's bringing his men across the field, and his guys swing out to the left, to be beyond Pettigrew's guys, he takes a shot again in the same ankle that he was originally injured in. And so when they take him back to the hospital, Trimble was a pretty direct guy. He was screaming and yelling at the surgeons for not taking his leg off. The other time when they tell him, then the same surgeon, Dr. McGuire, said, this is going to have to come off. Gee, Dia, why didn't you do it, last August when I told you I wanted you to?
Right.
And then afterwards, Trimble's an interesting guy to read about because he ends up out at the seminary, and he's very disliked by the staff out there. And he's disliked by the Union staff. But yet when you read about the guy, he was really good with kids. The families that would come in, he was often fun to talk to them.
I have a friend who he's not disliked by any means by adults. He dislikes a lot of adults. And he's great when kids come around. He's like a kindergarten teacher.
Oh, really?
Like he's fantastic. Yeah. And I remember one time I said to him, I said, why are you're so good with kids, but you're a miserable F word, around everyone else. And he goes, because kids haven't done anything yet. Kids are innocent. They're sweet. He goes, they haven't done anything. Every adult I know, whether I know they've done something or not, I know they've done something that I don't like.
Right.
There's something about them I just won't like. And I go, well, that's true, but that's no way to live.
No,
you can't live
and he certainly didn't have anybody in his corner helping him medically because of his personality.
Because of the way he was.
Right, exactly. So,
well, that is, that's interesting. The Trimble thing, because I never knew where he got hit.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the leg.
It was his leg. The thing I didn't know was his injury here in the same leg or the opposite leg.
Right.
It was the same leg. He ends up as an amputee.
His cursed leg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as I said, wasn't happy with the surgeons because they should have done it in August.
Of course.
This in July.
Of course,
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
And he said nothing. He just stood there.
He sounds like a guy that you just can't please, no matter what, right?
And he's in his 60s. I mean, he's a tough guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these people, back to A.P. Hill and Lee, kidneys and hearts, those are some serious organs.
Yeah.
And to be doing this, you got to be tough.
Yeah.
Or
really
desperate. I don't know. Maybe it was like either way.
Might have been some of both, but I mean, you definitely had to be tough.
Yeah, I guess you did.
Yeah.
All right. I got another one. We can do one more.
Why don't we
You want to
We
stop?
ready for the break?
Yeah, we're ready for the break.
Okay, why don't we do that, and then we come back and answer the questions?
Yeah, perfect.
Is that okay?
You should be a host.
No.
All right, we'll do that. We'll take a break from and hear from our sponsors, and then we'll come back with questions. We do have a good deal of questions. Of course, 6 questions. Lentz has submitted 6 questions, so everybody should be rest assured that you're going to get your required amount of 6 questions, Lentz. So we'll be right back after these words.
The Gettysburg Museum of History, located right here in the center of Gettysburg, PA. Owner and curator Eric Dorr grew up here and has spent his life collecting and preserving history through artifacts ranging from the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg, World War II, presidential items, pop culture, and more. His museum is free and open to visitors Wednesday through Sunday, 11 to 5 p.m., where you can stop by and immerse yourself in some of the most amazing artifacts that you would never believe exist in the middle of Gettysburg. If you're a fan of Band of Brothers and Everything Easy Company, you'll love his exhibit featuring the Dick Winters collection and artifacts from D-Day. You can even own your own piece of history by buying one of the many relics they have for sale in the museum and on the website GettysburgMuseumofHistory.com. The Gettysburg Museum of History is a non-profit 501c3 organization with a foundation that allows all purchases and donations to keep the museum operating and open free of charge. They have been featured on the History Channel, the Travel Channel, the Smithsonian Channel, and the Science Channel. Now you can check them out on American Artifact, the series on the YouTube channel, The History Underground. And on a personal note, I'd like to thank the Gettysburg Museum of History for being a sponsor of Addressing Gettysburg by providing the studio that we recently moved to and do all of our shows from. So that's the Gettysburg Museum of History at 219 Baltimore Street or the GettysburgMuseumofHistory.com. Movies and documentaries about history are spread out across the internet, and their quality is often suspect. History Fix delivers curated historic programming to your preferred device using their website or branded apps. Join History Fix for movies, documentaries, short films, and how-tos. Content covers historic eras ranging from the 1st to the 21st centuries. Their team of curators brings you the most comprehensive and authentic historical content available. Addressing Gettysburg podcast fans receive 20% off their first annual subscription. So what are you waiting for? Sign up at www.historyfix.com and use promo code ADGBURG. That's ADGBURG. Every subscription begins with a 7-day risk-free trial. And after signing up, download the History Fix app on your smartphone. So go to www.historyfix.com and use promo code ADGBURG. That's ADGBURG on an annual subscription. Escape into history with History Fix.
If you're a lover of history, then go to trhistorical.com. There, you'll find apparel, drinkware, decor, and more, featuring a wide range of subjects from the ancient world to the Cold War. Looking to make an impression with the perfect gift? Well, TR Historical now offers a vintage wrapping service for a truly unique presentation. And our listeners will save 15% when using promo code GBURG1863 at checkout. So go to trhistorical.com. TR Historical for the love
For the
of
Historian
history.
has a wide variety of titles, new and used, of military books from publishers like Osprey, Gettysburg Publishing, Stackpole, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more. I make it a point to go there once a week because I have new bookshelves to fill and I never know what treasures I'll find, and neither will you. They even have toy soldiers, model kits, games, children's books, and more. So stop by and check them out on your next visit to Gettysburg, or better yet, order right now online at forthehistorian.com and mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund you your shipping. And if you call 717-685-5207 or stop by the store on your next visit and mention us, you'll get 20% off retail price. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207. Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum, is housed in the historic Lutheran Seminary building constructed in 1832, a witness to the first day of battle. The museum's 3 floors of exhibits connect visitors to the dilemmas that led to the Civil War, provide a powerful and personal view of the battle's first day, and explore one of the battlefield's largest hospitals. No visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center is complete without a guided tour of the building's famous cupola, where on the eve of battle, officers and civilians saw thousands of Confederate soldiers' campfires burning to the west, and Brigadier General John Buford watched for vital federal reinforcements as fighting erupted on the morning of July 1st. Today, you can stand where Buford stood and discover how this view helped chart the course of the Battle of Gettysburg. Your trip to Gettysburg is not complete without a serious visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum. Purchase tickets online at seminaryridgemuseum.org or call 717-339-1300.
To get tickets or a cupola tour, listeners may call or walk in and mention addressing Gettysburg, or by ordering online using the promo code AG1863 for 20% off.
Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. It began here.
There's a devil to pay.
Attention all aficionados of Union Civil War music, your ensemble awaits. The National Association of Civil War Musicians, founded by the Grand Army of the Republic, serves as a beacon for those who cherish the notes that stirred a nation. Our association is a hub where the scores of the past are preserved and the spirit of camaraderie persists. Immerse yourself in the melodies that played through history. For example, take July 3rd, 1863. As Lee's cannons unleashed a maelstrom, the Philadelphia Brigade Band exemplified valor. Positioned at the heart of the onslaught, their music defied the cacophony of the largest artillery barrage in North American history. Their presence was a deliberate symbol. If the band could stand tall and play, then the infantrymen can lay in wait to hold that crucial ground. Today, we keep this and other memories alive. No matter if you sound the fife, beat the drum, or swell the brass, your contribution breathes life into our mission. Let's commemorate, collaborate, and preserve together. Step forward and join the ranks today. Visit nacwm.org. That's nacwm.org. The National Association of Civil War Musicians, honoring all the brave soldiers who dared to wage a war with only an instrument. Civil War Trails is the world's largest open-air museum, offering over 1,500 sites and stories for you to explore. Each Civil War Trails site has an interpretive sign to help fuel your imagination as you stand on remote mountaintop artillery positions, in fields where thundering cavalry charges took place, or in now quiet downtowns where raids, riots, or raiders shattered the peace. Over 60 Civil War Trail sites allow you to stand in the footsteps of the Gettysburg campaign across Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and of course, Pennsylvania. In fact, they are expanding further into Pennsylvania now with the latest sites in Wrightsville, Hanover, and Chambersburg. As you travel the trail, you'll find more than just great history. Beyond battlefields, great barbecue, beer, and bourbon await. Here's a pro tip: carry cash and never book your day completely to ensure that you can take that gravel road, explore that hiking trail, or pick up an amazing artifact from that awesome antique shop you find along the way. Request a free brochure shipped right to your door at civilwartrails.org, and be sure to snap a hashtag sign selfie next time you are out exploring. Click the link to Civil War Trails in our show notes. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own.
Hey everybody, it's Matt, and I'm here with Veronica and Bethany from the upcoming spin-off podcast, That's What She Said. And we just want to tell you about the Get Out of the Car Tour season.
Oh, wait, Matt.
Yeah.
I haven't been on one yet.
What's that?
I can't do this. I haven't been on one yet.
Oh, Beth. No, that's fine. You're all right. Veronica, you've been on one, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Veronica. So what would you say to people who haven't been, they've been thinking about coming? Maybe they should come out, right?
What are you waiting for?
What are you waiting for? That's exactly, right? What's your favorite thing about the Get Out of the Car tours?
The camaraderie.
The camaraderie. Of course. It's the same people very often. We see the same people every month.
New friends.
And it's new friends, new faces.
You're learning history with a group. You're not just learning it on your own, and it's a fun environment, very welcoming group of people that have now become like extended family, right?
That's right.
Family
Absolutely.
In Gettysburg.
And if you want to know what the rest of the schedule is, just go to addressinggettysburg.com, go to the Tours and Events tab, and find the full schedule there. And we'll see you on the field.
See you there. I'll try.
And we'll see you on the field.
See you there. Yes, I will.
All
Yay!
right, let me get the last goddamn word in. And we'll see you on the field. All right, that's good.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast with Matt Cowrie.
Okay, and we are back now with questions. Questions. Many questions. You know what we do? We have 3 calls in our queue so far. Our first lieutenants are watching, and they are calling in. And so because they are our first lieutenants, our highest-ranking self-commissioned officers in our officers corps over at Patreon, or officers club over at patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg, we're going to take the calls first, and then we'll get to the questions submitted in writing. Are you ready, Rick?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Let's see. We'll keep you on your toes. 6 questions is calling about Benjamin Franklin. Now, this is the 7th question, apparently, that that he is adding to the list here. Go ahead, 6 questions.
Hey, Mike.
Actually, hey, Rick, how are you doing today?
Good.
I'm calling with one of my questions because time is kind of short there.
Yeah.
So I want the one that I want answered for sure.
All right.
Which is what was the severity of the wounding to Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin F. Carter of the 4th Texas?
Yeah.
And did the wagon train ride impact that wounding at all? Potentially.
Great question. I don't know how many people know this story. Benjamin Carter was Lieutenant Colonel, commander of the 4th Texas, and he is shot as his unit goes up the face of Little Round Top in the face, in the legs, and in the hand. So he's hit in 3 places. He's taken to the hospital. When the Confederates leave Gettysburg, he decides that he doesn't want to stay. He wants to go. Lee left behind about 7,000 wounded soldiers that were too badly injured to go on the ambulance train. Sometimes the officers would, like we talked about, Pender going south probably to his detriment by getting in the ambulance. Carter did the same thing. Now, he decided that he wanted to get off of the ambulance because it hurt too much, and the Confederates honored his request. They took him out of the ambulance, and the house whose yard they placed him in is still present over at New Franklin, right by the railroads there, and that's where he was captured and then taken into Chambersburg, where he ultimately died. And Mike, are you aware of the story of his burial in Chambersburg?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I visited his supposed grave,
yeah,
where they think he's buried.
Right,
yeah,
where they think he's buried. And it's really a very touching story in that he cared for a lady's son who was killed at 2nd Manassas.
Oh, yes.
And then she's a widow. She marries a minister in Chambersburg and moves out there. And they can't really find a place to bury Lieutenant Colonel Carter, but they do finally. And then the cemetery he's buried in is moved. And you're right, nobody knew where his body was for a long time until ultimately it was found, or at least the location was found. And the touching part of all of this is his wife and 2 children died before the end of the war, and soil from their grave in Texas is put on his grave here in Pennsylvania, and vice versa. Soil from Pennsylvania is taken down to Texas to be put on his family's grave.
That's touching.
Yeah, very.
Yep.
All right, Michael, thank you very much. Don't worry. I've got
questions.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you. I've got 6 more questions from you in writing here. But actually, I've been able to narrow them down to 2.
Yeah, we talked about Marshall.
Right. So we've got a couple that we're going to do. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Have a great day, guys.
You too. I'll talk to you later. Okay, moving right along here to John B. John B. He's going to be on in a second. I should have pressed that. Hold on. He's got to listen to the lady tell him that he's got to wait for me to say hi to John. But okay, John, whenever she's done there, go ahead and say hello. John B. is on the air. Or is he? John B. in 3, 2. I'll return you to the queue, John, and we'll move on here to Paul V. Paul V. So they have to listen to when I hit go on the air. Then they have to listen to the woman, the mechanical computer woman, say, "You are now about to be on the air."
So this is all very technical. I like doing surgery, but I don't understand any of this stuff.
Believe me, I barely understand.
Can you hear me?
Paul, you're on the air. Hello, Paul.
Hey, this is Balthazar. How are you?
Oh, Balthazar, how are you? Sorry. It says Paul. The auto screen says Paul V or golfers are Barksdale's we. So
nice.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So,
but go ahead.
Here's my question. I've heard multiple stories and some accounts. What was the actual wounds of Barksdale?
Good question. He's got a lot of them. He's got, I think, 5 different wounds. Now, as an orthopedist, I'll tell you, although it's the least important of his injuries, he was shot in the leg or legs. He was shot in the arm, so an arm and a leg. But his fatal wound was a gunshot wound to the chest. He was shot in such a fashion that when he was given water as he was being resuscitated, it would come out of a hole in his chest, which tells you that his esophagus, the food swallowing tube, had to be open into the chest, and that's a devastating injury. That would be tough to even take care of today. But I'm surprised he lived as long as he did, because he's injured in the afternoon of the 2nd. He doesn't die for 24 hours, well, a little less than 24 hours. But it's a chest wound that kills him.
Now what was it again? That was a gunshot or a cannon?
I think it was a gun.
I've heard.
Yeah, I think it would have been a rifle shot. I think if a cannon hits him there, I don't think there's any living. I think if a piece of artillery, unless it's just a piece of shrapnel, but if it was canister, or if it was solid shot, I don't think he would have survived that more than seconds.
Man.
Yeah, the reason why I asked that was that I've seen accounts where of gunshots, and then Jake Borett's Gettysburg story talks about a cannonball being shot into his chest. I'm like, okay, so what is it?
Okay. Well, I don't...
Cannonball?
Yeah, if a solid shot...
That's what they say.
Yeah, then I would imagine some water would be coming out if he was drinking.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting about his injury is when you read about it, and it appears that he's shot from the front, but he wasn't. He was shot from the rear, and it was an exit wound in the front.
Oh.
And really, if you think about where he was and where he was going, he turned around to address his troops, and the Union shot hit him in the back and came out the front.
Man.
Oh, okay. Learned something new.
Yeah, it's in the regimental history of the 148th. They talk about his injury because he was taken to the Hummelbaugh House, which is where he died.
So him and Isaac Trimble are Barksdale. Oh, we're talking about Barksdale.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, I was letting Balthazar have all the hosting duties there, and I kind of started reading ahead there to the questions. Right. Balthazar, thank you very much for the call, and thank you for your continued support, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good one. All right. Now, so Barksdale is an interesting one. He's one of the more famous ones.
Right.
Poor guy, though. I mean, he was dead for 20 seconds, and they started like taking buttons and stuff from him, and in the hospital. And
I don't know how many people know the story about when his body was taken out of the ground next to the barn. It was his nephew, maybe, and his black manservant. And now this would have been after the war, so really it's not a black manservant, he's a free black man. Mm-hmm. And his bloodhound. And they come up here, and when they go to leave, the bloodhound won't leave. The bloodhound stays on his grave until he starves to death after they take Barksdale's body home. Yeah, at the Hummelbaugh House.
The dog starves to death?
Yes. Yeah, that's my understanding.
They couldn't pick him up?
No, he wouldn't leave the grave. Even though the body was gone, he wouldn't leave the grave.
Right, because he could, Oh, poor dog. My dog would do that for me, I think. I think so. John B., we're trying you again. Are you there, John B.?
I am. Sorry about that.
Good.
That's okay. What's up, John? Rick is all yours.
Rick, I wanted to know a little bit more about Scales' injury at Gettysburg, but also whether he was also injured at Chancellorsville. I read things about that, but I don't see any evidence of an injury before that or before Gettysburg. I know that his leg injury or the injury he received at Gettysburg, I guess, plagued him the rest of the war until he left service in early 1865. Right. I don't know if you had any more information on that.
Right. He's only 36. He's not a Trimble sort of a guy. He was injured at Chancellorsville, and this is where having a medical background helps. He was shot through the thigh on 5/3/63, but yet he's able to be involved in the attack in Gettysburg. So that tells me he didn't have a fracture. If he had if he was shot in the thigh and his femur was broken, he would not have been able to participate in this battle. He was wounded, as you may know, on July 1st when he was hit in the ankle, and they loaded him in an ambulance to take him off the battlefield. He shared the ambulance with Pender before he died down at Stanton. But I think they left Scales in Winchester, if I'm not mistaken. But his injury ended up with a chronic infection, and he wasn't really able to get back really to a command position for the rest of the war. But yes, he was shot in the thigh at Chancellorsville, but he recovered quickly enough from a soft tissue injury, if we can call it that, to command here at Gettysburg.
Lucky leg, or...
Yeah, well, I think it was the same leg. I'm looking at my records here. I don't know if it was... I think it was his left. But again, if it doesn't hit the femur bone and it doesn't get infected, then he can be up on it pretty quickly.
If you break the femur...
Yeah.
And can set it. How long does it take to heal? Does it heal longer than most other bones?
Nowadays, we rarely ever treat femur fractures without surgery because it's such a big bone in kids. But in an adult, we put a metal rod in that, and it takes about 3 months to heal. So it's a pretty serious injury.
I mean, I'm guessing with all the muscle around it, it would be hard to set manually anyway, right?
Yeah, we actually use a special piece of equipment that we put the patient on and put a traction pin in and pull as hard as we can and use an X-ray machine. It's a pretty fun operation to do. I'm sure one of my favorite operations.
Yeah, it sounds great. Oh God! Anything else, John B?
Oh, thank you very much.
All right,
you're very welcome. Thank you. And then we got one more. It looks like we got Matt here. I'll get to Matt in a second. So yeah. But you were saying though that there's a machine that pulls the bone apart, and then so you could put it back together, essentially.
Yeah, basically it'll if I just pull on the leg to try to line it up to put the rod in, you got to pull for a long time, and you can't do it for very long. And so we put a traction pin in, and then hook it up to it's called a fracture table, and you just start to pull until the bones now are lined up.
Right, and then you can let it go back together.
Yeah.
It's like being on the rack.
It is, but it pays better. Sorry, the first reference to that. No.
Matt, you're on the air.
Hey, I just got a quick question. With all your research throughout Gettysburg and all the injuries and wounds and deaths, what is the one on either side that stands out the most to you that just resonates? Sticks with you?
And Matt, but before we lose track of you, I just saw your voicemail this morning, and I will get back to you. Thank you very much for your offer. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, great. No, I'm glad you got it. Yeah, no, anything you need to help out, I'm always willing to do that.
Thank you, sir.
Down near Winchester, there was a Confederate artillery officer, Snowden Andrews, I think might have been the name. But anyway, he had a wound that resulted in his bowels coming out the front of his abdomen. It's called an evisceration. And he laid there with his bowels hanging out, and he started to yell at the surgeons because as he said, GD and I had a hound that this happened to, and we washed him out, and he lived. And so he talked them into doing that. I'll be darned, the guy lived.
No kidding.
Yeah, they put a metal shield in his abdominal wall, and that's what he lived with. But he survived what's called an evisceration, where your bowels are hanging out.
So farm life veterinary practices worked here.
Oh, yeah.
Because the patient said, I did this to a dog.
Oh, right. I did this to my dog, and he survived. I want you to do it to me. And
amazing.
And there were a couple. This happened down in Sperryville, which is in Virginia, and nobody thought he was going to live. But I mean, he's looking at his bowels, and he survives.
No, wait, I have a couple questions, and Matt, if you have more, we'll get to you after these. So, okay, one, the water then. I mean, they had to have boiled the water. Did they know to boil the water? I mean,
well, they didn't really understand anything about infection,
right?
So I don't know if they would have.
But the practice
of
boiling water to what we know as sterilizing things, wasn't that done? It wasn't. Okay,
they didn't know what sterile was.
Yeah, okay.
So you can see luck has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, because I mean, you just go down to a creek or a well, even if it's a well, right? You God knows what the hell you're pulling up there and throwing into the body to wash it out.
Right.
And of course, you don't leave the water in there.
No.
You're gonna drain
Wash it through.
Yeah, but still, what gets in there gets in there.
Right.
And my other question was, I've always wondered this because sometimes in war movies, you'll see someone get stabbed or shot or eviscerated, and they're screaming on the top of their lungs, right? Now, I know enough to know that when you want to get really loud and scream like that, a guttural scream, you need your guts, but you need the muscles in your abdomen. And I'm guessing if I'm sitting there with my bowels hanging out, those muscles are severed, correct?
They would have been ripped open by the injury itself.
So it's going to be hard for me to get that real
But as long as your lungs are intact and you can shout because you can exhale, you can get a pretty hefty.
So it would be like more from the
chest and the lungs than the abdomen.
So so it's as loud as I can get without the ab muscles. All right, Matt. Anything else you want for Rick? From Rick.
I was just wondering, how long did that guy live for?
Oh, a normal lifespan. He lived. He lived well past the Civil War. I'm not 100% sure that I've got his name right, but he was a Confederate artillery commander. If I'm not mistaken, I think he might have outranked Latimer here, Joseph Latimer here, but I'm not 100% sure of that.
And Rick, Matt also wants to know if you do private tours. Of course you do.
Sure.
You're in uniform because you're going on a tour right after this.
Yeah.
So I'll put you in touch with him so that he can book you. He's coming out with some friends.
I do general tours, but I do special
private tours as well. Get it? General,
private, colonel. I won't do a lieutenant. No, I'll do medical tours if people are really interested in that.
Yeah,
most of my tours are general tours.
Yeah, that's the ones.
What's that, Matt?
The ones we're looking to do is after watching the first one on the Union and the one on the South, the group I have coming, I told them about it, and they're more interested now ever.
Oh, great!
So we were looking to do a private medical one.
Yeah.
When is it? When is it? You're coming out? May?
I'm coming out April 4th through the 7th.
Okay, I might want to go with you on that. Would that be an imposition?
It wouldn't be if I was here.
Not.
But I'm.
Oh, are you going to be away?
I think I am.
Well, maybe we could set them up with Fran.
Yeah.
If you're going to be away.
4th to the 7th?
Yeah. Of April.
Yeah, I'm coming out the evening of the 4th, that Thursday, and then we're leaving Sunday.
Yeah.
There's somebody leaving a comment on YouTube now. He's like, I don't want to hear about this guy's travel plans.
Well, it's tough to do a tour when I'm in Europe.
You poor thing.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get you set up with Fran Fiak then. He's Rick's partner in crime, I'm sure you know. and that he could do just as good a tour. Okay, Matt, thank you very much for the call.
Thank you.
All right, guys, take care.
You too. Have a good one. All right. Thank you very much to our first lieutenants for participating in the show. Of course, you can do that too if you become a first lieutenant over at patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg or at any level that fits your budget and heart. Of course, the bigger the contribution, the bigger the heart. No, that's not true at all. Unfortunately, that's not how it works.
No.
Okay. Peter Vermillier says, I am interested in the wound sustained by Brigadier General Albert Jenkins. Could you discuss the nature of his wound and the impact it may have had on the battle? Did it keep his brigade from covering the Confederate left on the afternoon of July 2nd?
Yeah. I think the answer to that is yes. Albert Jenkins is a cavalry commander under Lee. He is supposed to be headed out to the left side of the Confederate line to watch that area and release Smith and ultimately Gordon to come back into Gettysburg on July 2nd. But on the way out there, pretty much out about near Barlow's Knoll or maybe the high school, Jenkins takes a shot, a piece of artillery to the head and face area. He survives, but he's out of combat and not able to really do anything. He is taken to a house that I think still exists out beyond the high school, but he's not able to relieve the soldiers that are out on that part of Lee's line. There was an author who wrote early during the publication of Gettysburg magazine who wrote on cavalry by the name of Paul Shevchik. And there's an article in Gettysburg magazine number 9 about this very thing of Albert Jenkins' wound on July 2nd. Made a big difference.
All right. Moving on to 6 questions, Lentz. Now, because of his phone call and because of some other questions or whatever, I've been able to eliminate 4 of his 6 questions.
Okay.
And also in the interest of time. So here we've got one here. Listen to this. This isn't even a question. The guy's nickname is 6 questions, and he just says this. Wade Hampton, please discuss the severity of the wounds he suffered at East Cavalry Field. Period. No question mark there. Just,
I can interpret it either way. Hampton is obviously a commander under Jeb Stuart. He ultimately takes over for Jeb Stuart after he's dead. He is injured on July 2nd as the cavalry come back into town over near Hunterstown, and he's got a laceration on his scalp, which isn't real severe. They sew it up or plaster it up, and then he's ready to go again on July 3rd. And when there's all the fighting out on East Cavalry Field, he takes 2 major lacerations to his scalp and his skull that come down the front, kind of into his eye area, and then up to the top of his skull. He can't keep fighting after that, and so he's put in a wagon and put in the ambulance train. He's got like a 4-inch gaping wound there. And then one of my sources also said he took a shrapnel wound to the hip. I've never seen that before, but it was his head injury that was largely the debilitating one.
Sounds it.
Yeah, it was. But he recovered and came back and ultimately was in charge of the cavalry to the end of the war.
Yeah. I guess, to be in charge of the Confederate cavalry, you didn't really need your head.
Yeah, I guess not. You just went where you thought the Union guys were going.
Right. All right. And then this other question we have here from 6th question. How was Major Joseph Latimer wounded? What made his wounds mortal? This is a great one. Latimer is one of those legendary wounds.
Yeah. 19 years old, the boy major. His artillery battalion is pretty much all off of Benner's Hill except for one battery, and he's up there with them when he takes a shrapnel wound to his left arm. Okay. he's taken over to the Lady Farm, which is on the Hanover Road, right across and down the hill, where an amputation is done. And that is done by his brother, who's the surgeon
No kidding.
for the unit.
Oh, my God.
So he's had the amputation, but it gets infected. And he doesn't want to stay, and so he takes off. And they get all the way down to Harrisonburg, Virginia, and that's where the infection takes over, and he's died. And I think he's buried down in Harrisonburg. But the irony there is that his brother did his amputation.
That's, I'm assuming, older brother.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Thomas Latimer.
When we hear people dying of infection, but what does that mean? Like, how does the infection take you?
Well, what happens is the pus forms around the area and then starts to spread to other parts of your body. And when it ultimately spreads to things like your kidneys, your lungs, possibly your heart, then it becomes often an unsurvivable level of infection that you're not going to get better from.
And the pus that's actually the body's immune system trying to defeat the infection, right?
It is.
It's not the infection itself.
Well,
it's caused by the infection.
It is. And nowadays, if there was pus, it wouldn't be there very long because the antibiotics would help get rid of it. And also, maybe surgery would be done to try to get rid of the pus as well. But it won't work. The surgery won't work by itself without antibiotics.
When they do the surgery to get rid of the pus, what are they vacuuming it out? I mean, or are they?
Yeah, you basically open it up and drain it out, and it just depends on what the infection is like. I've had cases where a guy has had an infection all the way up and down his leg, and you make an incision, and then it just runs out from down low up high, and it's just a matter of washing that out with a lot of fluid until that's cleaned out.
But like you say, that doesn't really do it unless there's antibiotics too, because all you're doing is getting rid of the symptom of the infection. You're not getting rid of the infection itself when you drain it.
That's right. And
I should have been a doctor, Rick.
I think if you do a little bit of mail work, you can probably do this. If you do the antibiotic and no surgery, that won't work either.
Right.
Just like if you do the surgery and no antibiotics, you
got to do them both.
Got to do them both.
Okay, let's move on here then to Ricky Fowler. Ricky Fowler says something very sacred in the Addressing Gettysburg world. He says Alderson Broderson, and we say that
Broderson.
We say that back to you as well, Ricky. Alderson Broderson to you as well.
I'm honored. Yeah.
What kind of wound did Dorsey Penner receive to his leg on July 2nd, and what sort of triage would have been performed prior to his return to Virginia? What factors led to his... So we covered the factors that led to his succumbing to the wound, I believe, and we talked about the wound itself.
Right.
But the triage, this is an interesting question.
Yeah.
So we talked about him being transported, and no removal of the shrapnel or anything has been done. No. He's traveling with all this stuff. So what would they have done? What was done?
Well, what probably would be done nowadays is he wouldn't have been allowed to travel, and he would have been taken to surgery at least 24 hours after the injury to open up that hematoma and leave it open so it would drain. And of course, nowadays there'd be antibiotics given right away.
Right.
So a more aggressive approach to that hematoma would have been done then, or would have been done now than was done then.
This might be a stupid question. But in the Westerns, they always throw the whiskey on the wound before they pull.
Sure,
A, did they know of that concept? And B, would alcohol have that type of antiseptic property?
It would have been helpful, but it wasn't an antibiotic, but it would have killed some bacteria.
How about a hot poker and cauterizing the wound?
No, that would make it worse.
That just stops it from bleeding, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But then it infects it with the soot from the...
Right, and you've got more dead tissue in that area. But the alcohol wouldn't be enough probably to just do it by itself. There were, through the course of the war, there were fluids used like bromine to clean out gangrene, but that was all kind of figured out as they went along.
Okay. So fascinating. All right. And then just refresh my memory, though. What were the factors that made him succumb to his wounds? Was it... We're talking Dorsey Pender.
He got a large hematoma that got infected, and then the blood vessel in that leg, which was intact, got infected, and they couldn't stop the bleeding.
And then it spreads.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Sarah Wendorf says, my question is, would any of the Confederate generals killed at Gettysburg have survived with modern medicine, in your professional opinion? That's a great question.
It is a good question, and it made me sit back and think of, okay, so, and Sarah's question was specific about generals.
Yeah.
And there are 10 generals killed at Gettysburg. On the Confederate side, I think Pender could have survived, and I think Armistead could have survived, but he was more unlucky than anything else because people still die nowadays of blood clots. If you think of the Union generals that died at Gettysburg, some of them might have survived, but a couple of them, I don't think they would have. I don't think they would have.
All right. JB Umstad says, what is the story about Ewell rinsing his stumpy knee off with a well pump?
Yeah.
Where was this supposed to have happened?
It's actually pretty well documented.
I love Jamie's
questions. You know where the Bender farm is, right over Rock Creek. They're rehabbing it. Right down by the road, there's a water pump, if you will, inside, and that's supposedly where he rinsed his leg off. Now, why did he do that?
You're talking the Benner farm or the off the Harrisburg Road?
The Benner farm.
Yeah,
I misspoke.
Benner.
The Benner farm.
Okay.
Yeah, right out by the high school. The reason that he would have done that was back then amputations were not done often in a consistent fashion, so it was sore, it didn't fit very well. His leg was, when he wore it all day long, it was a problem.
Probably smelled.
Yeah, it did, and the socket that it went into would have smelled, so he would have wanted to rinse that out and rinse his leg off. And, he did make the observation as he was coming through Gettysburg when he got shot in the leg, it don't hurt much to get shot in a wooden leg.
Yeah. And then she has another question. She says, what are some of the make-do items the CSA had to use in place of necessary medical equipment when they ran out? That's another great question.
Well, and they did run out quickly because the naval blockade kept a lot of stuff from coming in from Europe. And the Confederates came up with a device called a CHISM, that's CHISOLM, a guy's name, inhaler, which saved a lot of anesthetic because it was basically a little rectangular thing with two prongs that they put in the nose, and you didn't lose a lot of anesthetic that way. So they could save on anesthesia. As they ran out of medication, the Confederates were very good at using herbal supplements to take care of people. They knew that certain types of heart drugs could be gotten from flowers, quinine could be gotten from trees. So they did what they could, but they just had to do what they could get by with. As the war goes on, they're just getting lesser and lesser in terms of how much equipment they have.
It's interesting to me that you mentioned the quinine and stuff, just the different things like chemistry. Then up to that point, and I'm not a historian on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in my mind's eye, or in my understanding of things, is chemistry really wasn't that much advanced until after the war, when when we started really modernizing.
It was an interesting concept because things like the periodic table of elements was beginning to be understood, but not to the point where you could put things together and make medications all that easily.
Right.
It took really more of a sophisticated nature to do that, but that all came about towards the end of the century.
So things like quinine helping with malaria, for example, that would have been an accidental discovery.
Exactly.
Right. And not knowing exactly what we know that now.
Right.
Right. Okay. Got it. Rick, we made it to the end.
Oh, wow.
We made it to the end.
That's a lot to cover.
We did. I think you did a great job today,
Well,
Rick.
it was as always, great fun to do it.
It really is a lot of fun doing I love these medical episodes. And you know what? I feel like if there is such a thing as reincarnation, I hope I come back smart enough to become a doctor and I do it because I just find this stuff so fascinating.
It is, and it's something that I miss a great deal, being able to do surgery, but. I do this now, and it's a new love. So.
I performed minor, I would call it like battlefield wound dressing on my girlfriend's finger.
Is that right?
Yeah, we bought a new knife set.
And
it's like this German knife set, and the block has sharpeners built in. So every time you put it in or pull it out, it sharpens, right? So these things never go dull. And we just got it. She opened it up, and she's washing them.
Oh.
And I'm like, that's new to me. Apparently you wash everything when you get it. I never knew that. So anyway, so she's washing them and then she gets herself right on the side of the finger.
Okay.
And I think it was in here and she can't handle blood. So I go and I get the first aid kit and everything and the bleed stop. Got to get bleed stop, ladies and gentlemen. You know what that is?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
It's like the greatest thing to have on hand, and I've needed it a few times. So
I can tell you in the operating room, that's plan E.
Bleed stop.
Yeah, bleed stop. We're usually wanting to stop it in other fashions other than throwing bleed stop in there. But you can do it if you have to.
I found it came in handy when I was shaving my head, and there's like if it were shaved now, you'd be able to see there's like a white spot here from where I like shaved a divot out of my head, and it bled all day. And I had I'd gone through so many pieces of gauze, and I didn't have gauze tape. And so when I went to the pharmacy to get some more stuff, I had to like wear a hat over it to keep it on, right? And while I'm there, I'm just looking for tape for the gauze, and there I see this thing called bleed stop.
Yeah.
So I take it and I put it on my head, and within seconds it stops. Yeah. And it makes basically a scab. It's like desiccated potato, I think, right?
Well, and I mentioned this earlier with progress during the times of military conflict. That's where bleed stop comes from. It was used by the military over in the Middle East for some of the early Kuwaiti wars over there.
I think they actually they used it in an episode of Yellowstone.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, really? There was the people who were against the Duttons put a certain clover, I think, is the cows can't digest.
Oh, really?
In this field, and the herd ate it, and they discovered it. They were sick, and they can't belch.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So they're filling with gas.
I'd die if I couldn't belch.
Me too. Me too. I'd be so bored if I couldn't belch. But anyway, so the long story short, they're filling with gas.
Right.
And so the one wrangler goes over, takes a knife, and right into the abdomen of the one cow, and see this gas come out, and then he takes some bleed stop and pours it on.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Now I don't know if that's accurate to what they would do there, but the guy wwho wrote it is a rancher, so I would guess he
it is. Yeah.
But anyway, what was I saying now? Oh, yeah. So she's just. It's a long cut, and I can get it to stop bleeding on the majority of it. But this one spot, no matter how much, I didn't use bleed stop.
Close to the knuckle joint?
Well, what it was, I looked up, I Googled it, and there's a little artery here.
Yeah.
And she nicked the artery, and that's where, so everywhere else, I put new skin on it.
Okay.
And the new skin took, except that one little spot.
Because it moves there.
Yeah, well, and because it just kept, I could see it. It was just like pumping a little blood.
And most importantly, Matt, her tendons work, her nerves work.
Everything works.
Everything.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. No, and it healed up beautifully. I'm very proud of it.
Well, see? My job isn't that hard.
Right. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. Rick, thank you for coming on and doing this. Patrons, thank you for your support and all your questions. And we will talk to you all next time. All right.
Great.
Very good. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching.
Hey everyone, before you go, I would like to highlight a friend and supporter of the show, The Badge Maker, your source for authentic Civil War Corps badges and more. Purchase handcrafted, historically accurate Civil War Corps badges from all Corps. Discover a vast collection of military and civilian insignias of various kinds. Experience the exclusive service of custom hand-stamped reproduction ID discs. At his website, civilwarcorpsbadges.com, The Badge Maker brings history to life with precision and passion. Thanks for listening.
Our hearts so stout have got a spleen for suit is known from when whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for debt shall go to jail from Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for debt shall go